Welcome to the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer. The Leadmore podcast is the show where we sit down with leaders of today to help inspire and create more leaders for tomorrow. Because I believe the world needs more leaders. It's time to get started. It's time to get to work. And here in episode 38, I sat down with my friend Nick Seguin. Nick is an incredible entrepreneur. He's founded an agency. He worked at the Kauffman Foundation to support and help grow entrepreneurship. And now he's a very early employee at a really cool startup called Rise Science. And Rise is helping people have their best day, helping them maximize their life, their health, their wellness, their fitness through sleep. The analogy I like to use is if LeBron James optimizes and tweaks every single aspect of his life, from sleep to his workouts to his food, well, why can't you too, right? Leaders are doing just as important work, if not more important, of course. And we need to optimize the way we lead. And one of the most important ways to do that is through sleep. So in this episode, we look at how to get better sleep, why sleep is so important, what are the factors that adjust and affect our sleep, both positively and negatively. And then we get really strategic. Nick tells us, how we can find the cycles. We all have individual sleep cycles, how we can learn from those and then maximize those so that your day is scheduled around when you're at your peak and when to really optimize and be at your peak performance, right? So leaders are busy people. We have lots of things on our agenda and on our calendar. So let's make sure we start the day right by getting a good night's sleep. You're going to learn so much. Nick's an awesome dude, super smart. So let's just jump in here to episode 38 with Nick Seguin. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm so excited to have my friend Nick Seguin. How are you, Nick?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So, Nick, tell us, first of all, that what you do, the company you work for, and we'll kind of reverse engineer our way into that job. But where are you? What are you doing, focused on right now?
Yeah, I'm focused on helping people have their best days and meet their potential. And we do that by helping people optimize their sleep. And so I work at a company called Rise Science, founded in Chicago, but our team is distributed across the country. And my role at the company is I lead our enterprise office.
Yeah. And you, what employee number were you, and how many are there now? Because I know you've been at this for a little while now.
Yeah, I've been here. I'm coming up on 2.5 years at Rise, and I joined sub 5, so including the founders. So small team. And we've actually been really intentional about keeping that team small until we've got product market fit. So Today we only have 8 people on the team. And we've got obviously plans to scale that when the time is right, but small team, small but mighty with a big impact.
And so you think you guys are still figuring out product market fit, would you say?
I think where we are today is we feel like at the kind of like the core product level, right? Where that product the end user is using. We feel good about early product market fit. We've got some really strong signal. We'll continue to look for that in various distribution channels like enterprise that we're exploring right now. But we're feeling good about the progress we've made, and all the signal comes from the end users. And to date, it's been really positive.
Cool. So tell us, unpack briefly, and then we'll get into sleep. But how does Rise help people reach their potential? Yeah,
I think at the base level, the story I would tell you is if you want to meet your potential any given day, and I mean that across any dimension that we can measure about you, whether it's your emotional, your physical, your cognitive self, and then how that interplays with your relationships, your family, your own mental health, your ability to produce as a professional, any of those things have a ceiling, right? Like all of us have a ceiling on those, and maybe we can continue to lift that. But I, as an individual, literally cannot meet my ceiling in any of those dimensions unless I am getting my sleep need, unless my sleep is healthy. And there's a huge body of literature that will show that, across any of those measures, basically you are capped if you're not getting your sleep. And so what Rise does is we help people tap into kind of their own biology and overcome some obstacles that the rest of the market really isn't focused on right now to help people get more sleep and live the days that they want to live.
Yeah, and I love that idea of I follow you. You're a great follow on Twitter, and I know you're a sports fan as well. And I think about people say nobody in the history of the world has taken care of their body as much as a LeBron James, right? Every piece of his life has been so optimized from basically 18 on. And So nutrition, we have of course exercise, we have sleep. Where do those rank, like in terms of most important? Or I guess maybe the question is, why is sleep so important?
Yeah. So I think I'm biased. I work for a company that's focused on sleep, but if you go out and you do kind of a Google Scholar search, right, and you look for peer-reviewed research on sleep versus diet versus exercise, you're going to find, in this body of sleep science, a number of peer-reviewed research papers on the magnitude of like 2 times more than you will find in diet and exercise. And so what that means is, first of all, it's a much deeper and longer studied space. So the first sleep clinic ever was established in Chicago in 1925. So we've got almost 100 years. Yeah, almost 100 years of sleep science. So the other side, one of the things that I'll give you a quick example. We like to give kind of meaningful examples that people can quickly grok. So if we were to take an average healthy human being, right? And this is, we're talking at kind of a high level here, but an average healthy human being and restrict their sleep by 1 hour per night for 1 week, right? At the beginning of that week, they're healthy. At the end of the week, their neurocognitive vigilance, in other words, their ability to react, so a kind of a reaction time and stay vigilant, will be as if they are legally drunk, legally at the limit for alcohol.
1 hour per day.
1 hour per night for just 1 week. And the way we kind of tee that up to say, okay, now if I were to feed you flaming hot Cheetos for 1 week, it's probably not, you're not going to feel great. Yeah. You're not going to feel great, but are we going to affect your cognitive functioning, right? And your physical functioning at that level? We probably aren't. So when you think about kind of the magnitude of impact, sleep is foundational and actually impacts our ability to metabolize the fuel that we put into our body. It impacts our ability to maximize exercise and then also recover from that exercise. So I would say it's the foundation and more important than anything else.
And it also feels to me like, maybe not, I don't know, we were talking before we hit record, I have little kids, so maybe not, but it feels like the easiest one to potentially like dominate, right? I don't know, like maybe not, that's not the right way to say it, but like exercise, I like it. It's a de-stressor for me. It's more of like, it's just as much mental as it is physical, but some people just don't like exercise. Or diet, right? Like it tastes better to eat food that probably isn't good for you, right? So like sleep, generally, I think most people appreciate it or like it if they're doing it right? Like if does that make sense? Like it seems like the one that should be the most enjoyable to fix.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the whole, most people will say, when I get sleep, I enjoy it, right? I look forward to it. And I'm not going to speak for everybody. Obviously, there are people who have things going on in their lives. They may have, clinical issues and there may be some things standing in the way, or sleep may be kind of intimidating for any number of reasons. But yeah, on the whole, I think sleep people like. However, I would say that it's not simple. It's not easy. We were just talking about having kids. I mean, there are people who are focused on career, right? There are people who have external stressors in their lives. And I don't want to, I think we should draw into this conversation, this idea of privilege as well, right? So when we're talking, by and far, the conversation we're having is probably developed world. A lot of people who are in a decent place right now and are trying to optimize. But when you look at implications for food security, for housing security, just for oppressed populations in any way, those stressors in their lives lead to sleep restriction that they don't intend as well. So while it's something that I think a lot of us say, hey, this is something that we can do pretty easily if we put our minds to it, I think a lot of people have restrictions that we don't think about.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah. And I'm guessing the compounding cycle there is hard to break. If the stressors lead to bad sleep, the bad sleep probably keeps you more stressed and just really tough.
Yeah, in fact, sleep and stress have like a really well-defined bidirectional relationship where they contribute to each other. And so regardless of what that stressor is, right, whether it's external, whether it's internal, that stress will impact your sleep negatively and vice versa.
So you guys have science in the name of your company. So clearly you do the research and the studies. And is it fair to say that when we talk about diet, exercise, and sleep, is the sleep community more aligned and agreed upon the science? Because I feel like that's always hard too with diet, is like one person says eat this and another person says the exact opposite thing. Or, do cardio or lift weights, right? Like, what's the science?
Do HIIT? Are you doing HIIT? Are you doing, endurance? Like what are you trying to solve for and what's really working? I think I would say my answer to that would be Generally, the community of sleep scientists, the community of sleep science generally agrees on what works and what doesn't, what impacts sleep and what actually doesn't, what's marketing and what's science. There's still a ton that we don't know about sleep, right? There's still a huge, a vast realm of things that we need to figure out. And there are some incredible scientists who are hard at work publishing, every day around that. But by and far, it's one of the biggest bodies of research that we have. And I think some of the pillars that are there are agreed upon. And that's really what we try to do. You started this comment around that is we have science in our name for a reason. Our co-founders started this company after they published research when they were undergrads focused on sleep and helping people get more sleep. And so one of our core values is rigor. And our guarantee to our users is we will never expose you to anything in the app. We will never take an approach that we couldn't walk into a room of sleep scientists and propose and have them all nodding along with us. That's kind of our heuristic there.
Yeah. And that's in our internet, app world, that's such a separator in terms of like, it's not optimized for a dopamine hit or just like a gamification element, right? Like there's like real science behind what you guys are working on.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. We definitely are taking advantage of, behavior change models developed at Stanford in the lab for persuasive technology, because we do want to persuade people to do the right things. And so we're taking advantage of short and fast feedback loops and models that work. But the question becomes like, to what end and what are we trying to accomplish with those? And we think that what we're doing right now is really additive to people's lives.
Yeah.
And so we feel good about what we're doing.
Yeah, I think you're creating good habits and not bad ones, hopefully. So let's move into, and this, we could talk a little bit about how Rise does this too, but what are the factors that affect good or bad sleep? So we hear about blue screens, or blue light, we hear about food, we hear about, like habits, but I loved when we talked about even scheduling this podcast, I love this. You were like, hey, can we do it at this time? Because that's when I'm at my peak. And I was like, I don't even know what that means, but that's awesome. So let's dive into that.
Yeah. So I kind of started off the conversation talking about what Rise does. And I said it in a really specific way. So I'm going to return to that theme a little bit here. When we're talking about sleep, at least at Rise, what we're really talking about is your day. And that might sound counterintuitive, but when we're talking about sleep, we're talking about your waking hours, because I haven't met anybody yet outside of an acute situation where somebody's exhausted or, their 5-year-old came into their bed last night, so they didn't get the sleep that they needed. Right. Those are acute situations. But I think on the long term, I haven't met anybody who says, I want to spend more of my life sleeping. Right. They want to spend more of their lives growing as humans, helping other people, developing and being in the relationships in their lives. They want to spend their lives becoming better professionals, doing great work, enjoying this world that we're a part of or trying to make it better. Yeah. And so when we're talking about sleep, we're talking about how do we make your days better and how do we give you the energy to be at your best during that day. And the reason for that is the 30% of your time that you spend sleeping literally fuels the 70% of your time, your waking hours, right? So if that's true, then we obviously want to optimize the sleep. And your question about, what factors go into it, huge conversation to be had, right? Nuance, there's all these different points. Sure. The way that I would break it down is kind of into 2 buckets, and there's some then nuance underneath that. But the first is naturalistic sleep. And what I mean by that is like we as humans have evolved this thing, this activity, this mechanic called sleep over, millions of years, right? And so it's an evolutionary trait. It's something that we do for a reason. And what we should do is get out of the way and let our bodies and brains do what it wants to and needs to do naturally as much as we can. So that's the first thing is how do you get naturalistic sleep? And the second thing is get your sleep need. And most people don't understand this concept fully. I think a lot of us have these numbers in our head that have been pushed into us either through marketing or what have you. It's like, you got to get 8 hours, or now there's this, 7 hours, whatever it is. Yep. The reality is that every human has a genetically determined sleep need. At birth. Like yes. So yes, it's genetically determined within you. Now, when, if you've been around a newborn, they're sleeping 23, 24 hours a day. So as we mature to an adult, we basically make progress towards what our adult sleep need will be. So let's keep it in the realm of like adult sleep need, although there are ranges for different ages. So the average adult needs 8 hours and 10 minutes of sleep per night. So that's the average in the population. Probably where you've heard that, hey, you need 8 hours from. And again, it's genetically determined. It's like your hair color or your height. You can't do anything about it. There's nothing wrong with whatever it is. It is what it is. But there's a standard deviation of about 35 minutes on either standard deviation of 35 minutes, which means most adults need between 7.5 and 9 hours of sleep. And
that makes sense.
Any night you don't get your sleep need, you build up something that's called sleep debt. And so it's the concept of debt. If you're carrying any debt, it builds the same way that you have and that you're familiar with there. So it builds up over about a 2-week period. And it turns out that metric, if we can measure your sleep need and then we can measure your sleep debt over about 2 weeks, we can then predict how you're going to feel and perform across any number of kind of tests. So this is like a North Star metric that is predictive of human potential and performance every single day. So what are the factors that affect great sleep or really affect sleep is, am I getting enough? Am I meeting my need? And if I'm carrying debt, am I paying it down? And then the second thing is that sleep naturalistic? Because there are a lot of people, and I think this is probably increased during COVID as well, who will go to bed and they'll spend time in bed. They'll even spend time, quote unquote, asleep, but they may have alcohol in their systems, right? They may have other drugs in their systems. And what we know is that when it's not naturalistic sleep, it's not that naturally evolved sleep that our bodies need and our brains need. So give yourself the chance to get as much and basically meet your need for naturalistic sleep.
So naturalistic sleep also is like the quality or like the kind of the state of the sleep when you describe that.
Yeah. And again, just kind of like getting out of the way and letting our bodies take over. Like we've evolved these systems, they work, right? And so anytime there's a lot of experimentation out there. There's a lot of research about, CBD and THC and alcohol and all these things. I would say that the outcomes, like what we know and the evidence doesn't point to really any benefits from an evidentiary standpoint. So what we encourage and what I think the community would encourage, the sleep science community encourages, get as much naturalistic sleep as you can.
Interesting. So I want to ask you, I got to settle a score with my wife about the debt. Like she's convinced that on like a Saturday morning, like if we sleep in, I can just catch back up, right? Like we got to keep the girls, let them sleep. Is that possible? Can you catch up on sleep debt?
You can and you can't. And our co-founder, Jeff, has a really good position on this. So I'm really just parroting back what I've heard him say, but this is kind of the way to think about debt, right? So if we have an individual sleep need every night and we're not getting it any given night, like on the long term, right, in our lives, are we missing out on sleep? Like, yes, we absolutely are. And we think there are long-term chronic implications for that. We don't really know what those look like. We can't be sure about what those look like, but the evidence would suggest there are chronic implications. But in terms of really what people care about, like how do I feel today? How am I going to perform today, right? Can I be my best self today? It turns out that you can pay down debt and you can do that on a weekend. Although if that is your pattern over time, it's probably not sustainable and you're probably not at your best. You're also compromising your Monday mornings because you're shifting your circadian rhythm a little bit, which we haven't talked about. But I will say this, if you're carrying debt, try to make it up. We're always a proponent of that. And I'd say if you can, try to go to bed earlier rather than wake up later, but do whatever you can to make up.
Interesting. So let's talk about some of those factors. And I know this is how Rise helps you, but like that 70-30 split, what are the things during the day we can do that make our night better? So I have a few ideas, but I'll let you as the expert explain those.
Yeah. I love what you just said because we didn't even get there yet, right? I tried to frame everything and said, hey, your nights power your days, but it turns out that your days have massive impact on your night as well. So that's the right way to think about things. So from a kind of framework perspective, if we're trying to talk about how do I, optimize to try to get my sleep need, and while I'm doing that, how do I make sure that sleep that I am getting is naturalistic, then I think that the two levers that I would focus on to help with those two things are timing and intake, right?
Okay.
Or timing and consumption. And the way that I think about that is your circadian rhythm or your biological clock. It's something that we all experience. Actually, every living thing experiences. The body of research here goes back to the 1700s, in fact, and it's kind of this idea of chronobiology. And the way to think about that is we all have basically an energy pattern, and it happens throughout about a 24-hour period that varies across the population. But really the way that pattern looks is this. You're going to work through a period of sleep inertia, or what we've all experienced is kind of grogginess in the morning after you wake up. It's a chemically induced kind of state. Then we're going to ramp into a morning peak in energy, and you're going to feel at your physical, your mental, your cognitive, your emotional best during that time. We all then experience a dip in energy, kind of midday to late afternoon. We then peak in energy again, late afternoon, early evening. And then we dip back down through what's kind of called our wind down period into our melatonin window. And this is the time every night when our brains are naturally secreting melatonin. It's a signal to our bodies that we should prepare for sleep. And then we basically experience biological night, which is it's kind of like, if you will, a lower dip than the dip that we experience during the day.
Okay.
So this pattern of energy is driven by this little clock in your head. It's like the master pacemaker for your body. And it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And it's actually telling down to the mitochondrial level, every cell in your body, when to be producing energy and when not. And so that produces this kind of like waveform and pattern of energy throughout the day. Now, that pattern is, again, there's distribution in the population. You've heard of night owls and early birds, right? So that's just your natural inclination to want to be, that pattern is shifted later or earlier. And then on an individual basis, based on when and how much you're sleeping and when you're getting exposure to light, your own circadian rhythm will shift a little bit. So what that means is, let's say I'm an early bird. So my pattern is earlier in the day. I tend to wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning, and I want to be in bed earlier than most people as well. But depending on when I went to bed and woke up and how much light I got and when, that pattern is actually shifted, and it can shift by, 20, 30 minutes, an hour each day.
Okay.
And so what to think about then is your life is kind of this continual pattern of energy, these peaks and dips in energy. And that timing as well, that kind of rhythm, is how we think about consumption too. And what I mean by that, by consumption, is how much and when am I consuming light, food, drugs like caffeine and alcohol? When am I consuming, if you will, workouts or physical activity? When am I consuming content, or what I would call cognitive stimulation, right? So there's a physical stimulation, there's cognitive stimulation. So if you think about things, again, I'm going to keep going back to this framework and say, I want to get my sleep need every night, and I want to make sure it's as naturalistic as possible. Well, then the next layer down is like, when am I sleeping? When does my body want to be sleeping? Remember, I said there's that melatonin window every night. When do I want to be sleeping? But also, when do I want to be performing during the day? When will I actually be at my best? And when is it best? When is it best a time when I'm eating, when I'm getting light, when I'm cutting out light, when I am cutting out alcohol? If I'm going to have it, how do I give myself enough time so that I'm getting naturalistic sleep at night and it's not in my brain and disturbing that? So that's a framework I would work with, is like, there's timing of when I consume different things or have inputs into my body. And if I can know what my biology looks like with my circadian rhythm, I can then maximize that to maximize sleep, but also take advantage of those energy periods during the day.
All I kept thinking about when you're describing that is like, I don't even know how I graduated college, right? It's like how disruptive we are to that cycle between, and I'm not even talking about always alcohol, but just like irregular rhythms, late night movies, like just all that stuff, like just terrible in terms of like patterns and habits. Yeah.
I'm with you. It's not always alcohol, right? A lot of it's timing. A lot of it's life. I'm not suggesting that everyone listening to this episode or other people in life are, ingesting illicit drugs or just psychoactive drugs like caffeine that we use every day. The timing thing is something we kind of let our lives take it. We either let our lives happen to us, and I think that's an issue. There's just some research published, in fact, that showed that irregularity in sleep timing. So just irregularity, just a variance, right? It puts you at risk equivalent to short sleep and staying up late for depression at the same level. So in other words, like an irregularity in bedtime can put you at a risk for depression to the same level that massive sleep restriction as well as just like late nights will. So our bodies crave timing and patterns. Mm-hmm. And I think our modern lives and everything that we're doing really do a lot to stand in the way of that.
Interesting. So by now, I hope that anybody listening to the show, Leadmore is about, a show that I believe our world needs more leaders, and that leaders don't have to necessarily have the title or have the experience. And so this is definitely one of those episodes that hopefully by now people have connected that leaders also need to operate at peak performance. And so I think you hit it on the head there, where it's like so much, we let so much of life happen to us versus be proactive and control it. And so when we talk about that timing thing, this can be, to your point about peak, like scheduling your important meetings. I'm curious to ask you, like, when do the workouts go during the peak time, or do the big important like business meetings stuff go at the peak time? I want to help leaders like take advantage of their sleep so they can be their best. So talk about that. Once we figure out kind of where our cycle is, how do you then teach people to optimize their calendar? We'll say.
Yeah. And I think leaders are human beings as well, right? So I'm encouraging everyone to think about sleep debt and their timing, or their circadian timing, or their peaks and dips as their two levers. As that translates to a leader, let's talk about sleep debt really quickly. If your debt is high, all those different things that I talked about, right? Your emotional capacity, your cognitive capacity. There's actually a lot of research, and I'll follow up with the links. You can share this out to the community that shows, when you are not as emotionally calibrated, first of all, you're not as charismatic. You cannot inspire your people. Though, and again, there's research, there's peer-reviewed research on this. You're shorter in temper. From a cognitive perspective, you don't consider as many perspectives or data points. Your decision-making is inhibited. So there's a huge body of research on sleep and
you just did about 90% of what leaders have to do, like inspire, exactly. Like make decisions. Yep.
Right. And then there's also the role modeling, right? So there's kind of the nonverbal just role modeling here, where if you're up late and you're not sleeping as much and you're sending emails and things like that, you have impact on your team. And there's some ethical implications as well. There's some fascinating research around that. So that's what I would think about in terms of just my level of sleep debt. Again, can I even be at my potential any given day? And as a leader, we're called to reach our potential as often as we can. From a timing perspective, I love the way that you're thinking. So I'll kind of go back to what you were asking about. I woke up at a specific time today, and I asked you for this time because I'm in my peak. I'm at my best. So I woke up this morning, I kind of followed my morning ritual. I had some caffeine. I worked through my morning grogginess, and now I'm at my best. So as a leader, yes, think about that. Think about managing your energy versus managing your time. And what that means is, I'm going to have a really tough one-on-one, or if I need to sit down and do some deep work and really come up with a strategic solution, if I'm going to have a group session, or if I'm going to, having a conversation with customers or something like that, how can I put myself in a position where I am the most influential that I can be? I am the most charismatic that I can be. I am the sharpest and best problem solving that I can be. In fact, here back to sleep debt, my sleep debt level will determine how positively you perceive my voice. So all I have to do is sleep more, and you will perceive me as more positive. Think about that from a leadership perspective, right? So, place your toughest work, your most influential work in your peaks if you can. And I'm working with leaders across the country, around the world, who are beginning to shift. And we weren't the first ones to come up with this. There's some great articles and great research here, but we're really about giving people the tools to know on a daily basis, what does my day look like and how do I take advantage of that? Workouts is a really interesting one, right? So this is about taking care of yourself. There are two answers here. The first answer is, I would say the answer depends, rather. Are you trying to set a PR? So I'm working with some sales leaders right now. One of them is like a Peloton fanatic, and he wants to set a personal record every single time. And what I told him, I was like, hey, Mike, listen, make sure that you're working out in your peaks. And what that means is if it's a morning peak more than 90 minutes in, actually your afternoon peak, that is the time when most athletic world records are broken. So if you're really going for a PR and the best workout, do it in your peaks. I, on the other hand, am not looking for a PR every time I work out. My goal is, can I work out and stay healthy? And so the way that I think about it is, I don't want to eat into any of my productivity windows during the day. And so I place my workout actually midday. And there's a reason for that. One is, I'm not as productive. I'm not going to be as vigilant. I'm not going to be, tuned in as much. Great time to do that. And I will generally trigger some adrenaline and cortisol when I'm working out. And that helps me really to get through that dip and then kind of ramp into my next peak.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I have a Peloton as well, and sometimes I'm groggily jumping on the bike at like 6 a.m. and yeah, not my best scores, but I do like the feeling of like, it's done. You got it,
Yep.
checked off your list. And then you got some of those endorphins and you sweat a little bit for the day. So I suppose, yeah. Are you trying to be an athlete, or are you trying to use fitness to fuel you through the rest of the day? So that's interesting stuff. I'm curious on the leadership angle, right? We've had a mayor on this show. We've had a governor on the show, CEOs. I think they have these just jam-packed schedules, right? Like 15 minute, 30 minute, go here, do that, give a talk. There's this badge of honor. Like I'm curious when people, you have people say like, I only need 4 hours of sleep, and they're drinking eight cups of coffee a day. And, clearly the science probably said all people are different, but 4 hours, probably not. So like, how do leaders fight back? Or like, I know you guys work with CEOs and sales teams. Like, I'm sure they're thinking 8 hours, like I don't have time for 8 hours. Like, how do you rationalize that for them?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many influences on this, right? Like personal, cultural, economic in some ways. And it's tough to do this because, so there's some anecdotes that are kind of like counterfactual to that story there, right? So Jeff Bezos, huge proponent of sleep. He's like, I get 8 hours at least, probably more. I only make decisions in the morning. I won't actually start meetings until I think it's like 10 o'clock or something. He's on record as saying this.
Yeah.
So like the counter argument here is like, well, some of the best, most successful people in the world actually value sleep and think about their circadian and think about sleep as a proponent, as an input to that. If somebody is a 4 hour sleeper, they would be such an extreme outlier on that distribution, like long tail. I'm not saying it's not possible, but the reality is, based on the population average, it's probably not true. Here's the thing. I'm trying to remember his name. There was a professor at Stanford, it might've been Dement, and he's famous for kind of saying that if you feel slightly sleepy, that's like red alert. And what that means is, you're already too late, right? It's kind of the same thing with dehydration, right? If you're feeling thirsty, you're already dehydrated if you're out in the mountains or whatever. And so what that means is that our bodies have evolved almost like a self-preservation system that says, okay, if I don't have enough sleep, now all of a sudden, cortisol is kicking in, adrenaline is kicking in. You've probably felt it. Like you wake up and you haven't had a ton of sleep and you've got that kind of like jolt of energy. And that seems counterintuitive. Well, it's your body and your brain trying to tell you you're okay. That goes back to kind of like evolution again. Like it was probably we were awakened because of some danger, right? Sure. And we need to fuel the body to be able to like survive. So it's literally like a fight or flight mechanism.
Yeah.
So in fact, we don't know how sleepy we are. There's some really fascinating studies that show like subjective responses to how sleepy you are versus objective performance on like reaction time or vigilance tests. Very different. And so, people saying they're slightly sleepy is red alert. The average need in the population is 8 hours. So unless you're an outlier, you're on the other side. And, it's a tough conversation to have. You've got a busy mayor, you've got a busy governor, you've got a busy CEO, and you're like, what do you want me to do? And I think it's about changing. If you want to change people's minds, you have to kind of change how they view the world, right? And what that means is, I think I saw Shane Parrish tweet that recently, so I can't take credit for it. But,
okay.
I would want to sit down with that person and say, like, let's get serious and let's get honest about, tell me about those interactions, right? Tell me about what you remember. Tell me about the outcomes there. Tell me about even how you're feeling across, all these dimensions of your life. And is that really where you want to be in the life that you want to be leading and the outcomes you want to be driving? Maybe they're going to say yes, but to a person, I haven't met people who are, chronically exhausted, who don't say like, hey, I do think there's headroom. The science is compelling. And when they try it, this is the biggest thing. When you try it and you pay off a couple hours of sleep debt, and you've probably done this, you pay down some sleep debt, you feel like a superhero, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying don't get the things done during the day that need to get done. But what we're trying to tell people is there's more possible. And that's really goes back to why we're spending our lives doing this. We think that chronic sleep restriction is one of the biggest problems facing the Western or the developed world. And it's limiting our potential, not only economically, but it's limiting our potential in our lives. And we're trying to unlock that potential basically in humanity.
That's awesome. And I love that you, like we said, going back to the science is in the name, you guys approach it with such rigor, as you said, as a core value, that I think mainly I bring that question up because it's like these stories we tell ourselves as leaders is like, we have to fill that schedule. We can't have any like free time. We don't, workouts, like who has time for a workout? Like it's these narratives, that these kind of cultural narratives that have just grown and just kind of reinforced themselves that just may not be the right way. Like we got to look at things a little bit differently. And I love that you guys are bringing the facts as well as like the qualitative, like I just felt like a superhero, right? It's both
Right.
are strong.
Right. That reminds me, like, I always wonder about how much room we have, or that we perceive we have, to test or experiment as leaders, especially when we're kind of on this, we're on the pedestal, if you will, and everybody's looking up to us and things are depending on us. So this wasn't about sleep specifically. I think this was more about work patterns, but I read an article in HBR recently, and they talked about, I think it was a consulting firm. I'm pretty sure it was a consulting firm, but I'm missing the details. Long and short, there was a vendor or a provider, and then there was a customer. And the researcher basically went to the provider and said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to knock off a day of work per week. In other words, we're only going to have your team work 4 hours per week, right? Or, sorry, four days per week, not 5 days per week. Yep. And at first everybody was freaking out. Like, what's the customer going to think? Our productivity is going to go down. I mean, you can guess the outcome of what I'm telling you here is like, it didn't. The customer actually didn't care. They didn't notice any outcomes in terms of productivity and delivery. And so the idea here is like, what stories do we tell ourselves, to your point? Are we experimenting? And also what do constraints do? Like what kind of gains do we actually allow ourselves to access when we put constraints there? And I think we need to experiment with that on an individual level as well as a group level.
This is so great. I feel like I could ask you about sleep for hours. But I want to finish with some stuff about you, Nick. And so the last question on the sleep front, and you didn't ask for like a sales pitch for Rise, but like the question that I ask myself is like, how do I know like what my cycle is, or how do I know what my number is, right? Because I definitely have had that feeling where sometimes you wake up at 6 and you just pop up before the alarm even goes off. And then sometimes you wake up at 6:45, in theory, getting more sleep, and you wake up just super groggy and just hard to get going. So does Rise help us figure out what that number should be, or tell me how Rise does that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like all of us have this intuition, although many of us are kind of unnaturally restricting sleep and kind of building our days based on, external responsibilities that we might have, or, family or something like that. That I think that's really one of the unique things that Rise is doing. So we're actually utilizing a model that was sponsored by and developed by the Department of Defense. And they were doing it because when we put an individual into a warfighting situation, right? And oftentimes that is not on US soil, oftentimes that is multiple time zones away somewhere. And the story that I've heard is specifically we put a fighter pilot up in a $2 billion plane 12 time zones away. It turns out that we want them at their cognitive, physical, and emotional best in order to operate and produce the outcomes. And so there have been models, there have been a lot of studies and kind of biomathematical models developed that say we can actually take data from the individual and we can build those models and know that. And so we're actually making that available to end users through Rise. So every single day we're taking your data, we're putting it through this model, and we're showing you what your circadian is. And to date, again, kind of like this is that thing we've known forever, right? I said chronobiology has been studied since the 1700s, but in terms of making it accessible and viable to the end user, that's really one of the things we're trying to pioneer here a little bit.
Cool. Well, now I want to ask a couple questions about yourself. And so I think the one that first pops to mind is, you've had a fascinating leadership journey. You've started your own agency and grown that, very large, exited. You've worked at Kauffman Foundation supporting entrepreneurs. And so 2.5 years, why this problem? What's drawn you into like working on this? I mean, obviously sleep is a big part of our lives, but tell me about that. How has your path led you here?
Yeah, this is definitely an answer that's kind of like a scratch my own itch situation. So I was really fortunate to work at this incredible healthcare IT company prior to Rise. So that was my last experience, based in Columbus, called Cover My Meds. I give it a little plug. And so I was working on a new product team there for a while, and then I ended up moving over into people as we were getting ready for an acquisition. But I actually thought I had a chronic disease. I was worried. I started talking to doctors. I was trying to figure something out. And the symptoms were this, like I had been a pretty high performer all my career, right? I had been an entrepreneur. I'd always had a lot of energy, and I had no energy. I couldn't focus during the day. My communication was down. I wasn't feeling right kind of from a mental health perspective. And that's why I started consulting doctors. I learned I had a sleep issue. And it turns out that mine was like a chronic clinical sleep issue. And regardless, what it was doing was it was restricting the number of naturalistic hours that I was getting every night.
Wow.
And that was the first time I ever realized, oh my God, like my nights are impacting my days. And so I went down a rabbit hole on my own. And so fast forward, and when I became aware of Rise and started talking to Jeff, it was just like, it was right. It made sense that I could actually spend time helping more people solve a problem that I knew firsthand what the impact was.
Well, that's an easy hire if you're Jeff. I mean, between your experience and like having such a close connection to the problem, that's great. Okay, so a little rapid fire I always like to finish just so listeners can know a little bit more about you. Like I said, you're a great follow on Twitter. What's a book that you recommend to people, or a book you've read recently that you say, John, you got to read this?
Yeah. In the leadership vein, I would say Endurance. So my wife read it last year. I just finished it. It's a story of Ernest Shackleton and his crew's Antarctic expedition in the 19 teens. It's fascinating. It's riveting. It's really well written. So I would highly suggest that. And then I have to throw one out there. I just finished The Big Goodbye, which is the storytelling of the making of Chinatown, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. So.
Huh. Where do you stand on? I didn't tell you about this one, but where do you stand on the one Why Sleep Matters? That one that's pretty popular right now.
So is that Why We Sleep, or is there
Why We Sleep? Yeah, so Walker.
I mean, there's probably one that's called Why Sleep Matters too. Yeah, so Matt Walker wrote that several years ago. I think by and large it is super accessible. It's got a lot of great information. I think he's come out, and some people called him out and said, hey, there were some misses in terms of interpretation of research and kind of positions taken on that. He has since come out and kind of corrected those and put new positions out. But I just sent it to an executive team for a big company in Canada yesterday. Like, it's a great book. I highly recommend the read, and Walker is a great voice for sleep health. Cool.
Yeah, I read that one, and I enjoyed it too. So that's good to hear that, it kind of jives with the academics. So, okay. Yeah. What, how do you, I've been asking folks, I think this might be the first episode we really haven't talked much about COVID. I mean, it did come up a couple of times, I guess. Certainly our sleep and our routines have been impacted, but I've been asking people, how do you unplug or de-stress, right? You live in Chicago, you're probably in a small apartment with your wife. Just what do you do to de-stress? Maybe it's sleep, I guess.
Yeah. I probably should be a lot better about this. I'm going to be very honest with you. It's something I should improve upon. If I had to answer that, I would say one of two things. The first is just walks. Getting out. It's not a workout. It's maybe taking a call or something like that, but getting outside and not being inside and just taking a long, 5-mile walk or something like that. So that would be one. And then the second is, so I don't have a TV and we don't have cable or anything like that. For the first year ever, I subscribed to NHL TV because I'm a Blue Jackets fan. And so It's been a little escape for me to watch Blue Jackets games live and be able to talk about it with my brothers and my dad. And so I think that's something that I've done. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause you're a Columbus guy, but that's hometown, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. All right. The next question we asked, this is a hiring question at Lemonly, because we want people to brag about themselves. What's your superpower? The one thing you do better than everyone else?
What is my superpower? So a friend of mine, guy I used to work with and guy I've done a lot of backpacking, like backcountry backpacking with, he actually told me one time, when you're on trail and you're backpacking, you just have trail talk. You go everywhere with your conversations. Yeah. I don't know if I can curse on this episode, but he said your superpower, Nick, is that you actually give an F. And I thought that was interesting. We dug in, but I actually think it makes sense, and I've come to embrace it. Like, I actually really care. And I think the people that I work with or my family, if we're talking about politics or economics or culture or whatever it is, if I take a position, like, I really, really care. If I'm working for a company, like, I give an F. And so I think that would be my superpower.
That's great. And I think back to your time when I first met you, I think at Big Omaha, when you were at Kaufman, you probably, how many entrepreneurs do you talk to in a day, right? And it's hard to probably truly care about each one and their success when you have dozens. But I'm sure if they feel that goes a long way in terms of supporting those entrepreneurs. That's great. Okay. And then the last one, like I said, you've been a leader. I mean, you are a leader. You've been a leader as a CEO. You've worked for some great CEOs. You're well-read. Who are the leaders or mentors that have shaped, your life, Nick?
The leaders or mentors. Well, one comes into mind. I think you know him as well. Talking about big Omaha community, Ben Milne has been a friend now for almost a decade, I guess.
We had Ben on episode
probably about a
3
decade
of this show.
Oh, did you really? There you go. Yeah, Ben called. He was on the way to the grocery the other day, and he gave me a call, and it was just like great to hear his voice. He is a CEO that I would want to be. I would want to model myself after him. He's a CEO that I want to work for. I would work for him in a heartbeat. And he's also just an incredible human. And so I definitely would say Ben is in that category. Another person is someone actually I met while I was at Kaufman too. His name is Doug Krebs. He was working in Kaufman Labs. So his background, he worked for a long time. He was with IBM and then he was with Cerner. He stayed a close friend and has advised me at different times in my career. Good news is he's a Buckeye fan as well. So we were texting about Buckeye basketball this morning. And then like the last person that I would name there is a guy, this is an interesting story. So I did help start a company when I was in college, and I spent a decade at that company or more. I will admit that I went out and interviewed for kind of real jobs my senior year because we were early. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. And I got a consulting offer, actually. So it was a management consulting offer. I ended up turning it down. But the guy that I interviewed with he was living in Columbus because he was working with like L Brands and Abercrombie and stuff like that. So he ended up, he pushed me, he took me out to lunch. He was like, no, you should really accept this offer, everything like that. Fast forward, I pulled him onto our advisory board at my first company, and he has stayed friends, ever since. And so ever since I think I was 21, 22 years old, he tried to hire me. I've been seeking his advice. He shaped our company.
That's fantastic.
And today he's a great friend, but I still go back to him when I'm in a tough situation and look for his perspective.
I forget, maybe we've talked about, did you start as a consultant? Did you take that, or did you do the company route that you built?
No, yeah. So we've been running the company since our sophomore year in college, and I interviewed for that senior year, got the offer, but walked away, and we kind of took the risk on building Dynamic as a real company. So.
Which turned out to be the right move. But I did the management consultant thing right out of college. Made it about 11 months. That's about all I could.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I started Accenture up in Minneapolis, and so I kind of was doing the same thing. Did I go the entrepreneur route? And we're talk about the stories we tell ourselves. Like schools certainly prepares you for that path. And 22 years old, and you get a great salary, and it's like, this seems great. And you got to move to the big city, and I'm actually so grateful for that experience to learn, how that world works. It shaped ultimately how we built Lemonly. So,
right. I had no idea. That's awesome. I'm glad you had the experience, but I'm also glad that you pulled the ripcord pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. I think this is one where we definitely need to make sure we leave with what's the like, if people are like, this is really interesting, I want to learn more about sleep. Maybe I want to try Rise. What's our sort of call to action here? How can people get more help if they're curious about their sleep journey?
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is I'll just say, go read Why We Sleep. Great read, easy read. The other side of that is there's another book called Internal Time. It's one of my favorites on chronobiology. So it'll help you understand the timing and how it shapes our lives. So I would say go read those books first and foremost if you're interested in the subject. I would always encourage people to download Rise and give it a try. We give a free week trial up front before a subscription kicks in, so you can kind of figure it out and see if you're interested. And then, I always love conversations. So if you want to tweet at me, or I'm nick@risescience.com. Always happy to provide any information that I can based on people's situations.
This is great. Thank you so much, Nick. This is awesome. All right, everyone. That was episode 38 with Nick Seguin of Rise Science. I hope that you are really motivated and inspired to have a great night's sleep tonight. And not just tonight, but every night. As we can see, sleep is one of the most important levers that we can push and pull on our life, and hopefully, as Nick said, maximize and live our best day each day. So Thanks, Nick, for coming on. Check out the Rise Science app in the App Store if you're curious about learning more, and you can do their free trial. And of course, check out all the Leadmore podcast episodes that come out every Thursday. Can't believe that we're almost to March here. We have an awesome lineup of episodes coming next month. So go and subscribe to the Leadmore podcast wherever you listen, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, wherever. And why don't you leave us a 5-star review while you're there too? We'd love that. That helps other people find the show. And we're very, very grateful. Thanks for listening, and be well.